The Ascendant Hope drifted quietly on the outer fringes of the human fleet. Its hull, worn and patched from years of service, glimmered faintly under the distant starlight. This ship, once a proud symbol of humanity's early exploration efforts, was now the punchline of every alien commander's joke. Its outdated design and minimal weaponry made it a perfect candidate for the back of the line, far from the front lines, where the real action was. Around it, the rest of humanity's fleet was a collection of sleek, formidable warships, their advanced weapons systems designed for annihilation. The Ascendant Hope was none of those things. Its engines sputtered at half capacity, its shields flickering weakly, and its weapons, if they could even be called that, were nothing more than old missile launchers that had long since been surpassed by more efficient technology. If any of the alien fleets even glanced its way, they would have laughed, dismissing the ship as a relic unworthy of their attention. But Captain Elena Taylor wasn't laughing. Her gaze, cold and resolute, was locked onto the massive alien armada looming in the distance. The enemy had arrived, an overwhelming force of ships from countless alien races, each with their own history of victories over weaker species. They were here to finish what had already been started, to extinguish the last flicker of humanity's resistance. A great galactic alliance of the most advanced and powerful civilizations, they had long considered humans a joke, a species too primitive and divided to pose any real threat. "Captain, we've been assigned to the rear of the formation," the communications officer said, voice tinged with regret. "I suppose they didn't want us to get in the way." Elena didn't respond at first. She stood, her arms crossed over her chest, studying the enemy forces through the reinforced viewports of the bridge. She had heard the same thing for weeks now, from allies and enemies alike. The Ascendant Hope was an embarrassment. Some even called it a floating graveyard. It had no place in this war, they said. It was just a distraction, something to be sacrificed when the time came. But Elena wasn't the kind of leader to bow to pessimism, even when it came from her own side. She knew the value of her ship, and she knew the worth of every person on board. The Ascendant Hope wasn't just an old warship. It was a testament to human perseverance, a symbol of how far humanity had come in the face of impossible odds. She wasn't about to let it be forgotten, not while she was in command. "Send a message to Fleet Command," she ordered. "Tell them we're ready. We may be at the back, but we're not out of the fight." Her voice was calm, but there was an edge to it, a warning to anyone who might underestimate them. The Ascendant Hope wasn't done yet. They had underestimated humanity before, and they were about to learn why that was a mistake. The human spirit couldn't be quantified or measured with technology. No advanced weapon could account for the sheer willpower of a species that had defied extinction time and time again. The rest of the crew began their preparations, the usual hum of activity filling the bridge. Elena didn't let herself dwell on the doubts creeping into her mind, though she couldn't ignore the cold knot of fear in her stomach. The enemy was formidable. Too many ships, too much firepower. But then again, no one ever expected the Ascendant Hope to last this long. Maybe that was the advantage they needed. She turned back to face the viewport, watching the endless rows of enemy vessels drawing closer. The calm before the storm settled over her, but inside, her heart raced. This wasn't the end. Not yet. The Ascendant Hope would show them just how wrong they were to dismiss it. And when the battle began, Elena would make sure they learned to fear the ship they mocked. The eerie stillness of space enveloped the Ascendant Hope, the ship's worn frame barely a whisper against the vast, star-filled abyss. Elena stood at the helm, her back straight as she gazed out through the viewport, watching the enemy fleet approach. It was almost surreal, the calm before the storm. The tension was unbearable, thick enough to cut with a knife. She could hear the soft hum of the ship's systems, the occasional voice of her crew members as they went through the final checks, but in her mind, all she could hear was the distant thrum of impending destruction. 5 minutes to enemy engagement, reported Lieutenant Parker, her voice steady, but carrying a hint of the anxiety that had been creeping into the crew's words over the last few hours. Elena turned to face him, the young officer's eyes betraying his nervousness despite his attempt to maintain professionalism. "Stay sharp, Lieutenant," she said, her voice calm yet firm. We're not running from this." Parker nodded but didn't respond. He had learned long ago that when Lena spoke, there was little room for argument. She wasn't just the captain of this ship, she was their leader. And no one under her command had ever doubted her determination. That was why, despite the Ascendant Hope's condition and the odds stacked against them, every member of the crew was ready to face the enemy head-on. Elena's thoughts drifted back to the early days of this war. The Ascendant Hope had always been seen as an afterthought, too slow, too old, too fragile, but they'd survived battles where others hadn't. They'd fought when retreat seemed inevitable, and every time, against all odds, they had found a way to push forward. Now, as the alien fleet loomed ever closer, Elena knew it wasn't just their survival at stake. It was humanity's last chance to show the galaxy that they weren't ready to be wiped out. "Captain," Lieutenant Reed called from the communication station. "I'm receiving a transmission from Fleet Command." Elena turned sharply, her focus shifting. She stepped over to Reed's station, where the screen flickered before displaying the face of Admiral Hayes, the grizzled leader of the human fleet. The Admiral's face was stern, his eyes narrowed as if he was trying to assess the situation from a distance. "Captain Taylor, you're in the back of the formation. Stay out of the way," Hayes said, his voice clipped. There was no warmth in his tone, just cold, tactical advice. "If the enemy's focus shifts to you, we'll have no choice but to write you off. Don't make a move unless absolutely necessary." Elena's jaw tightened, but she kept her voice neutral. "Understood, Admiral. We'll stay in position until further orders." But inside, Elena felt the familiar fire of defiance. The Ascendant Hope might have been placed at the back, but that didn't mean she would sit idle. She had a plan, and it didn't involve standing by and watching her fleet crumble. The enemy might think humanity's most ancient ship was no more than a footnote in this war, but Elena had seen how her crew rallied in the face of overwhelming odds, how they never gave up, never backed down. They were ready for whatever came next. "Captain," Parker called again, interrupting her thoughts. "Enemy forces are entering weapons range. They're targeting the front of the fleet." Elena nodded. This was it, the moment the warship had been designed for, and the moment that would define her crew's legacy. Her hand hovered over the control panel, fingers brushing against the cold metal as she adjusted their positioning. "Activate shields. Prepare for evasive maneuvers," she ordered, her voice unwavering. "We're not just going to wait for the fight to come to us. This ship might be old, but it's not out of the game yet." With a deep breath, Elena turned back to the viewports. The vast armada of alien ships, some of them hundreds of times the size of the Ascendant Hope, advanced steadily, their weapon systems coming online. A fleet so vast that it could swallow a dozen human ships in a single strike. But Elena wasn't intimidated. This was their moment. She clenched her fists. The Ascendant Hope would prove them all wrong. Humanity wasn't just going to survive. They were going to make the galaxy remember their name. "Prepare for battle," Elena said, her voice cutting through the quiet like a blade. "We fight now, or we die. There is no other choice." Her crew, unwavering in their trust, responded with determination. The calm before the storm was over. The Ascendant Hope was ready. And no one, least of all the aliens, could predict what would happen next. The distant rumble of enemy fire echoed through space as the first shots were exchanged. The Ascendant Hope shuddered as its ancient shields flared to life, absorbing the incoming blasts. The air on the bridge crackled with tension. Elena stood at the helm, her eyes locked on the advancing alien armada. The rest of the human fleet was already engaging, the sleek warships moving in precise formations, firing coordinated salvos at the oncoming enemy. But Ascendant Hope was different. The ship wasn't designed for conventional combat. It wasn't equipped with the latest weapons or advanced shielding. What it had instead was something the enemy hadn't counted on: human ingenuity, determination, and an unwavering refusal to back down. "Enemy ships are closing in," Lieutenant Parker said, his voice sharp with urgency. "They're targeting our starboard side." Elena didn't flinch. She knew they would be targeted first. The Ascendant Hope was the weakest link in the formation, and the enemy would focus on eliminating it as quickly as possible. She had expected this. The question was, how could she turn their aggression to her advantage? Prepare evasive maneuvers. Full speed to port, Elena commanded. All hands, brace for impact. With a jolt, the Ascendant Hope lurched to the side as the engines roared to life, pushing the ship into a sharp turn. The massive alien vessels fired again, their weapons streaking through the void, narrowly missing the Ascendant Hope as it darted out of their line of sight. A few blasts clipped the edges of the ship, but the shields held firm, flickering as they absorbed the hits. The crew scrambled, working in perfect harmony. The tactical officers monitored the enemy's movements, feeding information into Elena's command console. Despite the Ascendant Hope's outdated systems, they had adapted, modifying old technology to gain an edge where they could. Every decision was calculated. Every move was decisive. "Captain," Lieutenant Reed called out, "we're being flanked. Multiple enemy ships coming from our rear." Elena's eyes narrowed. She didn't have time to think. "Activate auxiliary engines, push us forward, and get those missile launchers ready. If we can't outrun them, we'll make them regret it." The bridge crew followed her orders without hesitation. The Ascendant Hope lurched again, its rear thrusters flaring as the ship surged forward, narrowly avoiding a massive barrage that would have decimated its back end. But Elena wasn't just avoiding the attack, she was setting the stage for something bigger. The enemy ships were closing in, confident in their numbers, their advanced firepower. But they were about to discover something about the Ascendant Hope that they hadn't accounted for: the human crew's ability to adapt and surprise. Elena's finger hovered over the control panel. It was time. Activate the secondary power matrix. Channel everything into the ship's energy output. A low hum filled the air as the ship's energy systems began to pulse with power. The Ascendant Hope was an old ship, but it had one advantage: a hidden, experimental power matrix that had been installed years ago as a last-ditch effort to salvage the ship's combat effectiveness. At the time, no one knew if it would work, but Elena knew one thing for certain: it was their only shot. The ship's engines flared brightly, their intensity increasing exponentially. The alien ships, too focused on firing at the rest of the human fleet, failed to notice the sudden shift in the Ascendant Hope's energy output. "Now," Elena shouted. Without warning, the Ascendant Hope unleashed a burst of energy that rippled outwards like a shockwave. The power surged through the ship, and the ship's systems came alive, more potent than ever. The first wave of alien ships that had been closing in on their rear were caught off guard. The shockwave hit them with devastating force, their shields flickering and collapsing in an instant. The alien ships, once so confident in their superiority, were now in disarray. Communications were down. Systems were failing. They had underestimated the Ascendant Hope, and more importantly, they had underestimated the humans aboard it. The crew cheered, a mixture of disbelief and exhilaration flooding the bridge. But Elena's face remained focused, her eyes scanning the chaotic battlefield. The tide had shifted, but this was only the beginning. "Stay sharp," Elena commanded. "We've got their attention now. Let's make sure they remember us." The Ascendant Hope had just begun to prove its worth, and Elena knew it was far from over. The battle had only just begun, and humanity's fight for survival was far from decided. The Ascendant Hope surged forward with a newfound ferocity. The burst of energy had sent the first wave of alien ships into a chaotic retreat, but Elena knew it was only a temporary advantage. The real battle was still ahead, and the alien Armada was far from defeated. They had underestimated humanity before, and now they were realizing just how much that mistake would cost them. "Captain, we've disabled their forward shields," Lieutenant Reed reported, his fingers flying over the console. "But we've only got a few seconds before they regroup and retaliate." Elena nodded, her mind racing. The Ascendant Hope was still vulnerable, its old hull weak and exposed. But this wasn't just about holding out. It was about turning the tide in humanity's favor. That's when she remembered the ship's secret weapon, the one thing no one in the fleet knew about. The Ascendant Hope wasn't just any old ship. It had something hidden deep within its core. A technology, experimental and untested, that had never seen the light of battle. The power matrix had always been a gamble, but if there was ever a time to use it, it was now. Activate the hidden power core, Elena ordered, her voice sharp and calm. Her command was met with a slight pause as the crew exchanged uncertain glances. The power matrix had been a secret, a last-ditch measure in case they ever found themselves in a situation like this. But it had never been used before, not in battle. The crew wasn't sure how it would perform, or even if it would work. But Elena had no time for hesitation. There was no retreat now. The hum of the ship's core deepened, a low, resonating sound that seemed to vibrate through the entire hull. The air in the bridge crackled with static electricity as the Ascendant Hope systems powered up to a level no one had ever witnessed. The energy flowing through the ship was immense, almost overwhelming, as the core began to channel its power into the ship's weapons and shields. "Core is online," Lieutenant Parker confirmed, his voice filled with a mix of awe and disbelief. "We're pulling more power than the ship was ever designed to handle." Elena didn't wait for a second thought. She had made her decision. Redirect the energy to the pulse cannon. Charge it to full capacity. A ripple of excitement spread across the bridge. The pulse cannon, a weapon of pure, concentrated energy, had always been one of the ship's few remaining offensive capabilities, but its power output had always been limited by the ship's failing systems. Now, with the power matrix fully activated, the weapon was charged like a thundercloud, ready to release its fury. Outside the ship, the alien forces were reassembling. Their ships were massive, their weaponry far more advanced than anything humanity had at its disposal. They had regrouped after the initial shockwave, but they still underestimated the humans' ability to adapt. They didn't realize the Ascendant Hope had just turned into something far more dangerous than they could have imagined. "Elena, we've got incoming fire," Parker warned. The alien ships were preparing to strike back with their full might, their massive cannons charging up in unison. The Ascendant Hope wasn't fast enough to dodge them all. The first barrage of enemy fire exploded just outside their shields, a deafening roar echoing through the ship. But Elena remained calm, her eyes locked on the viewport. She had only one shot at this. "Fire the pulse cannon," she commanded, her voice firm and unwavering. The Ascendant Hope fired. A brilliant, blinding beam of light erupted from the ship's core, cutting through space like a blade. The energy was so intense that for a split second, everything seemed to freeze, time itself holding its breath as the pulse cannon's energy ripped into the heart of the alien fleet. The beam slammed into the lead alien vessel with devastating force, tearing through its hull like paper. The ship didn't even have time to react before it was obliterated, the explosion sending shockwaves rippling through the void. The other ships weren't spared either. The blast continued, cascading through the ranks of the enemy, disintegrating ship after ship with brutal efficiency. For the first time, the enemy fleet hesitated. They were no longer the hunters. They were the prey. "Direct hit on the flagship," Reed reported, his voice filled with disbelief. "They're retreating." Elena didn't allow herself a moment to celebrate. The battle wasn't over, but they had made a statement. The Ascendant Hope had just unleashed a hidden power that no one, least of all the Alien Alliance, had ever expected. The underdog was no longer a joke. They had proven that humanity was a force to be reckoned with. The crew cheered, but Elena's mind remained focused. There was still more to do. The enemy was reeling, but they would fight back. The Ascendant Hope was just getting started. And this time, humanity wouldn't be dismissed. The aftermath of the Ascendant Hope's pulse cannon shot echoed in the silence of space. The enemy fleet, once so confident in their overwhelming numbers and superior firepower, was now in disarray. Alien ships, large, powerful war vessels, were torn apart in seconds, their hulking forms disintegrating into debris as the energy pulse cut through their defenses like a hot knife through butter. The blast had been so powerful that even the remaining ships in the alien Armada hesitated, their commanders scrambling to adjust to the unexpected turn of events. "Elena, the enemy's flagships are retreating," Reed said, his voice filled with disbelief as he watched the alien ships begin to break formation, their once imposing front lines now scattered and chaotic. "I don't think they know what to do." Elena's gaze was fixed on the massive displays before her, tracking the movements of the retreating alien vessels. Her pulse raced, but her mind remained sharp. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Despite the damage the Ascendant Hope had caused, the alien forces still vastly outnumbered them. They were regrouping, and they would be back, angrier and more dangerous than ever. "Hold your fire," Elena commanded, her voice steady. "They're regrouping, but they won't stay disorganized for long. We need to make this count." The Ascendant Hope was still vulnerable, its hull riddled with scratches and burn marks from the earlier exchanges. The energy matrix was still operational, but it wouldn't be able to fire again with the same intensity for some time. Elena knew they had only one chance to press their advantage before the enemy adapted. They had to act quickly. The alien commanders, shaken by the unexpected turn of events, were no longer the calm, calculated forces they had once been. Fear had seeped into their ranks. They had never anticipated that a single human ship, especially one like the Ascendant Hope, could inflict such damage. Their arrogance had blinded them, and now they were scrambling to recover. "Prepare to engage at maximum speed," Elena ordered, turning to her crew. "We need to strike before they can reorganize. Full power to the engines, all weapons online. Get us into their formation. Now." The crew moved swiftly, each member responding with practiced efficiency. The bridge hummed with the energy of controlled chaos as the Ascendant Hope began to reposition itself, weaving between the remnants of the alien fleet. The massive warships, once poised for a coordinated assault, now looked disoriented, their movements uncoordinated. They were no longer the predators, they were the prey. "We've got a clear path to their rear flank," Lieutenant Parker called out, scanning the battlefield. "If we can hit them from behind, we might disrupt their engines and take down their command structure." Elena nodded sharply, her fingers dancing across the console. "Do it. Focus on their communication ships. Take out their ability to coordinate." As the Ascendant Hope shot forward, its battered engines roaring to life, the crew locked in on the alien ship's communication vessels, vulnerable targets that, if destroyed, would cripple their ability to mount an effective defense. The human ship darted through the chaos, its movements erratic and unpredictable, as if it were more of a ghost than a warship. To the alien fleet, it must have seemed like the very embodiment of humanity's defiance, a single ship moving with purpose through a sea of alien dread. "Fire at will," Elena commanded, her voice cool despite the tension that gripped her chest. A series of rapid shots from the Ascendant Hope's missile launchers and energy weapons tore through the alien communication ships, cutting them down one by one. The alien ships closest to the Ascendant Hope attempted to retaliate, but they were disorganized, their fire scattered and ineffective. The crew's precision was unmatched, and they struck with deadly efficiency. With each explosion, the alien forces were thrown further into disarray. "Target neutralized," Lieutenant Reed reported, his eyes wide with astonishment as the last of the alien communication ships exploded in a fiery bloom of destruction. The Ascendant Hope continued its relentless advance, but Elena knew they had bought themselves only a temporary respite. The alien fleet would recover, and when they did, they would be more dangerous than ever. The enemy commanders were angry, humiliated, and desperate. They wouldn't make the same mistake again. "We've shaken their confidence," Elena said, her voice low. "But this isn't over. We forced their hand, but now they'll be coming for us. We need to be ready." The crew nodded in unison, their resolve hardening. The Ascendant Hope had done the impossible. It had thrown the alien fleet into chaos. But it had also earned the ire of the most powerful military force humanity had ever faced. And as the battle raged on, Elena knew one thing for certain. The true test of humanity's survival had only just begun. The Ascendant Hope had proven its worth, but it would take everything they had to finish what they started. The chaos of the battlefield seemed to stretch out endlessly as the alien fleet began to regroup. Despite the damage the Ascendant Hope had inflicted, their massive warships were now shifting back into formation, their firepower intensifying with every passing moment. Elena stood at the helm, her gaze fixed on the holoscreen as enemy ships slowly closed in on their position once more. The Ascendant Hope was battered, its hull scarred from the earlier exchanges. The pulse cannon, though powerful, was still recharging, and their weapons were growing weaker by the minute. But Elena was unshaken. This battle was far from over. "Captain, we've got incoming fire," Parker warned, his voice strained. "They're launching a full-scale assault." Elena didn't hesitate. "Deploy decoy drones. Redirect all power to the shields. We're not going down without a fight." The Ascendant Hope's auxiliary systems flared to life as dozens of decoy drones shot out from the ship, scattering across the battlefield. The drones, small and nimble, were designed to mimic the ship's signature, drawing the attention of enemy ships and forcing them to waste precious firepower. It was a desperate tactic, but one that could buy them the time they so desperately needed. The first volley of alien fire tore through space, narrowly missing the Ascendant Hope as the decoy drones danced between the incoming blasts. But there were too many ships closing in from all sides. The alien fleet, now unified and more focused than before, was bent on destroying their target, the Ascendant Hope. "Elena, their flagship is locking onto us," Reed reported urgently, his hands flying across the control panel. "They're charging their primary weapon." Elena's heart skipped a beat. The flagship's weapon was powerful enough to obliterate the Ascendant Hope in a single shot. They needed to act fast. This was their last chance. "Lieutenant, target their propulsion systems. Take out their engines. We need to cripple them before they fire." The crew responded instantly, executing her orders with precision. The Ascendant Hope angled sharply, its damaged hull creaking under the strain, and fired everything it had left at the alien flagship's engines. The missiles and laser blasts tore into the massive ship's rear, shaking it violently. For a moment, Elena dared to hope that they might have finally crippled the enemy's most formidable vessel. But then, a bright flash of energy erupted from the flagship, and the space around them was filled with a massive shockwave. "Elena, we've been hit," Parker shouted. The ship shuddered violently, alarms blaring as the hull groaned under the assault. "Shields are down to 20%. The engines are still functioning, but we've taken damage." Elena's grip tightened on the console, her mind racing. They had barely avoided the flagship's retaliatory strike, but the alien fleet wasn't done yet. Their guns were trained on the Ascendant Hope, and they would not let up. Her ship was bleeding energy, and the odds of surviving another direct hit were slim. "We can't take another hit like that," Elena said, her voice tight with determination. "Parker, any chance of getting the pulse cannon online?" Parker glanced at the status screen, his brow furrowing. "It's still charging, Captain. At least 5 minutes before we can fire again, and we're not sure if they'll have the same effect. We've drained a significant amount of power from the core." 5 minutes. They didn't have that long. The alien flagship, now limping but still operational, had clearly made its decision. It would destroy the Ascendant Hope first, and then deal with the rest of the human fleet. The remaining alien ships were forming a firing line, and Elena could see the weapons heating up, preparing to unleash another devastating barrage. "Prepare for evasive maneuvers," Elena ordered. She turned toward her crew, her eyes filled with steely resolve. "We're going to make sure they regret underestimating us. If we're going down, we'll take a few of them with us." The crew didn't hesitate. They had faced impossible odds before, and now, as the alien fleet loomed closer, they were ready to face them again. The Ascendant Hope veered sharply to the right, narrowly avoiding the first wave of fire. The ship's movements were jagged, unpredictable, an ancient, battered warship outmaneuvering ships many times its size. "Elena, the enemy flagship is preparing to fire," Reed shouted, his voice filled with urgency. The massive weapon on the flagship's bow lit up, a menacing red glow building in intensity. This was it, the final shot that could end their fight and their lives. Alina's mind raced, the seconds stretching into eternity. There had to be a way to turn this around. Then, as if fate had intervened, she saw it. The alien flagship's cannon, still charging, was vulnerable, its power source exposed for just a fraction of a second as it prepared to fire. Target the power core of the flagship, Alina ordered, her voice deadly calm. All firepower, now. With everything they had left, the Ascendant Hope launched its final barrage. The blast struck true, and the alien flagship erupted in a blinding explosion, its power core shattered. The ship, once a symbol of their superiority, was now a charred hulk drifting helplessly in space. For a moment, everything stood still. The remaining alien ships faltered, thrown into confusion. Their most powerful vessel had been destroyed. Alina didn't allow herself a breath of relief. The battle was far from over, and the enemy had just witnessed humanity's will to fight. The Ascendant Hope had just dealt a mortal blow, but the true test had only begun. The enemy flagship, once the symbol of alien power, was now a smoldering wreck drifting in the void. Its destruction sent shockwaves through the remaining alien fleet. The massive ships faltered, their command structure in chaos. Yet, despite the damage, the enemy was far from finished. They were furious now, their pride wounded, and their forces were more determined than ever to wipe out the human ship that had dared to challenge them. Alina stood at the helm, her heart pounding, but her resolve unshaken. The Ascendant Hope was battered, and her crew was exhausted, but the sight of the wreckage of the enemy flagship was a testament to their resilience. They had defied the odds and taken down the heart of the alien fleet, but now came the hardest part, surviving the final assault. "Captain, they're regrouping," Lieutenant Reed reported, his voice grim. "The remaining ships are breaking formation and locking onto us. They're going to make one last push." Alina nodded, a cold fire in her eyes. "We knew this would happen. Prepare for a final stand. Everyone, hold your positions. We're not giving up now." The alien ships, though shaken, had recovered quickly. Their weapon systems were still intact, and their desire for vengeance was palpable. A wall of energy blasts and missiles shot toward the Ascendant Hope, each one more powerful than the last. Alina's knuckles whitened as she gripped the console, guiding the ship through evasive maneuvers, narrowly avoiding the incoming fire. The Ascendant Hope twisted and turned, its old engines screaming in protest as the crew pushed the ship to its limits. "Shields holding at 10%, Parker reported, his voice strained. "We can't keep this up much longer, Captain." Alina's mind raced. The enemy fleet was closing in from all sides, and the Ascendant Hope was vulnerable. They were running out of options. The pulse cannon was still recharging, and even if it fired, there was no guarantee it would have the same devastating effect as before. The ship's power core was near exhaustion. If they didn't find a way to turn the tide soon, they wouldn't survive. "Deploy the last of the decoys," Alina ordered, her voice calm despite the dire circumstances. "And reroute all remaining power to the engines. We're going to need every ounce of speed we have left." The decoy drones shot out from the Ascendant Hope, scattering once more to create confusion among the enemy. The small, nimble drones weaved in and out of the alien ship's line of fire, forcing the enemy to waste precious seconds trying to target them. But Alina knew this was just a temporary distraction. The real challenge was the final push. The Ascendant Hope needed to make one last, decisive strike. "Parker," Alina said, turning to the weapons officer, "I need that pulse cannon online. Now." Parker's fingers flew across the controls, his face tight with concentration. "It's at 90% charge, Captain. We're almost there, but we don't have much time." The alien ships were closing in fast, their weapons aimed directly at the human ship. Alina's eyes scanned the battlefield, searching for any opportunity, any weakness. The ships were all but in formation, ready to unleash a barrage that would tear the Ascendant Hope apart. That's when it hit her. The alien fleet had been relying too heavily on their weapons and firepower. They had underestimated the one thing they had never accounted for, the human ability to think on their feet, to adapt and improvise when all seemed lost. "Reed, listen closely," Elena said, her voice low but filled with conviction. "We're going to do something they won't expect. I want you to target the weak points of their propulsion systems, their engines. We can't go head-to-head with them, but we can outsmart them." Reed blinked, realizing what she was suggesting. "Captain, you're thinking of taking out their engines. Disable them completely." Elena's gaze hardened. "Exactly. If we can't win with firepower, we'll take their mobility. We cripple their ships, and then we finish this." Without wasting another second, Reed began targeting the propulsion systems of the closest alien ships, carefully calculating the perfect shot to disable their engines. The Ascendant Hope weaved through the firestorm of enemy blasts, getting closer and closer to the heart of the enemy fleet, just within range. Elena's heart raced as the last of their decoy drones were destroyed, and the Ascendant Hope became the sole focus of the alien ships. "Elena, we've got one shot at this," Parker said, his voice tinged with urgency. "The pulse cannon is ready." "Fire," Elena commanded, her voice fierce. The Ascendant Hope unleashed its final shot. The pulse cannon erupted with a force greater than ever before. The beam cut through the vacuum of space like a spear, slamming into the heart of the alien fleet. It wasn't just a direct hit. The shot struck precisely where it would do the most damage: the engines of the enemy ships. The alien fleet's ships began to falter. Their massive propulsion systems exploded, sending shockwaves rippling through their formations. The remaining vessels, now without the ability to maneuver, were easy targets for the final barrage of missile fire from the Ascendant Hope. One by one, the alien ships were disabled, their engines failing, their weapons offline. The battle was nearly over. Elena watched as the last of the alien fleet drifted helplessly in space, their once proud ships now broken and defeated. "Mission accomplished," Reed said, his voice full of disbelief. "We've done it." Elena exhaled, her tense shoulders relaxing for the first time in hours. The Ascendant Hope had faced overwhelming odds, but against all expectations, humanity had won. They had stood their ground and fought back with everything they had. But Elena knew one thing for sure. The victory wasn't just a triumph of technology or tactics. It was a testament to the indomitable will of humanity, to the relentless spirit that refused to be broken, no matter the odds. And that spirit would carry them forward, even in the darkest of times. The silence that followed the destruction of the last alien ship was almost surreal. The Ascendant Hope floated in the vast emptiness of space, surrounded by the wreckage of the once mighty alien fleet. The battle had been brutal, but humanity had triumphed. Elena stood at the helm, her body weary from the tension of the fight, but her mind sharp, still processing the enormity of their victory. "Captain," Parker said, his voice quieter than usual, "it's over. We've done it. The alien fleet is wiped out." Elena nodded, her eyes still glued to the screen as she watched the last remnants of the enemy ships drift in space, their once menacing forms now nothing more than shattered husks. The Ascendant Hope was battered, its systems barely holding together after the relentless onslaught, but it was still intact. It had survived, and so had her crew. "Commander, we've got a transmission," Reed reported from his station, his fingers flying over the console. "It's from command. They're calling in to confirm our status." Elena felt a surge of relief as the familiar face of Admiral Larkin appeared on the screen. His stern expression softened as he took in the sight of the Ascendant Hope on the verge of collapse, but still standing strong. "Elena," the Admiral said, his voice filled with pride and awe, "I don't think anyone ever expected the Ascendant Hope to do what it just did. You've made history today. The entire fleet is in shock. You and your crew have proven that humanity has a strength that no one, no alien race, can break." Elena allowed herself a small smile, though her body still ached from the battle. "We just did what we had to do, Admiral. We didn't have a choice." "No," the Admiral replied, "but you did have a choice in how you fought. You used everything at your disposal: ingenuity, courage, and determination. And you showed the enemy that humanity will never back down, no matter the odds. Alina's heart swelled with pride, but she knew this victory was only one chapter in a much larger story. The Ascendant Hope's success wasn't just about the battle, it was about what it symbolized. The human spirit, the unyielding will to survive, to fight, to stand up for what was right. Today, they had won a victory, but there was still so much more to be done. "We're coming back to base," the Admiral continued. "The enemy may have been beaten today, but we need to prepare for the next phase. We're not sure if this is the end of their invasion or if it's just the beginning. Whatever happens, the galaxy knows now that humanity isn't to be underestimated." Elena met the Admiral's gaze with unwavering resolve. "We're ready, Admiral. We'll fight for Earth, for the future, and for every person who believes that humanity is worth protecting." As the transmission ended, Elena turned to her crew. The tension on the bridge was starting to dissipate, replaced by a sense of cautious relief. They had done the impossible. They had turned the tide of war. The Ascendant Hope was battered and bruised, but it had become a symbol of what humanity was capable of. Not just as a force in the galaxy, but as a species. "Elena," Parker said, breaking the silence, "you realize what we've just done, right? This is going to change everything. The aliens, they're going to have to rethink their whole strategy." "I hope so," Elena replied, her voice steady. "But this battle was only one part of a much bigger war. The galaxy will be watching us now, and we need to make sure humanity's voice is heard, loud and clear." The crew nodded in agreement. They had won, but they knew the war wasn't over. The alien threat was far from gone, and there would be more battles to come. But they were no longer the underdogs. The Ascendant Hope had shown them all that humanity could fight back, and fight back they would. As the Ascendant Hope limped back toward Earth, Elena stood at the helm, her thoughts racing. There would be time to rest, time to regroup. But one thing was clear: humanity's place in the galaxy had been secured, and the universe would now know the strength of the species that refused to be conquered. For the first time in a long while, Elena allowed herself to dream of the future, a future where humanity stood tall, unbroken, and unstoppable. The Ascendant Hope had proven that no matter how dark the night, the dawn would always come, and with it, a new era for humankind.